Okay, Assalamu alaikum. Hello everyone. I want to move on with our book, our journey with Aristotle, and looking at rhetoric, which in Arabic, of course, is the word balagha. So, if you remember in the last video, we talked about argument and proof, and that when you make an argument, you must also be able to prove it. So, I'm going to go through the book in terms of the first one. Remember that Aristotle, in his book, talks about the idea that you need to know the genre. What field are you going to use rhetoric, right, to achieve a certain good as well? So you need to know the kind of rhetoric, and broadly speaking, there's the political, the legal, and there's also the political, the legal, and the ceremonial aspect to rhetoric. So you need to know: are you in the political sphere? So in that case, you'll be arguing about something good in the future. Are you in the legal? So are you talking about defending something in the past, and so forth, right? And so we need to be aware of this. So I'm going to dive straight in and get into the first one, which is the political goodness. The political goodness. And so what does it mean to say that political rhetoric? So we talk about a genre or group within rhetoric. What does it mean that political rhetoric persuades or dissuades about the future to attempt to achieve the end, right? And in this case, it would be something good, right? Something we desire for its own sake is a good. So what is this good? Of course, the conversation now is all about what does it mean? What is good? What are we trying to achieve politically? And I'm not going to go into that for now. And that's beyond the scope of my video. And this is a slightly longer video, by the way, but we'll go through it. So the word political sometimes is a little bit reductive. A better adjective, a better way of describing this word, adjective in Arabic is obviously sifa, is deliberative, right? It's this kind of rhetoric, it's deliberative. We're deliberating about things, okay? So in our political discussions, we deliberate about things, about what we as citizens want our government to do in the future. So the political genre is always about what we want to do in the future. And we deliberate about many, many things, right? We deliberate predominantly, and we should only really be deliberating about things that are within our power, okay? Things that we can really do something about. So when you're talking about politics and rhetoric, you're not going to deliberate about something that you can't really influence, okay? So for example, you might praise a beautiful sunrise, but you're not going to deliberate around whether the sun is going to rise tomorrow or not, right? Because it doesn't matter what you say. It doesn't make a difference to the sun rising or not, irrespective of what you say, okay? We do not debate about nature or chance, because we can't do much about these things, okay? So we recognize that many subjects are not rhetorical. Scientific ones, for example, helps prevent one from being a fool, making a fool of himself or herself, okay? Politics, on the hand, allows for influence, right? And in our legislative bodies, our representatives deliberate about things that are within their power. So we talk about things in politics, in the political genre, about things that are within our power, things that we can change. And that's the first point that's really, really important to bear in mind. And that's generally, if you like, a life rule as well, right? We're focused on things that we can influence, rather than getting really upset about things and debating things that we can't really influence and we can make no difference about. So Aristotle, in his book, he actually identifies 5 political topics. That's finances, trade, national defense, war and peace, and legislation. So these are the 5 sort of topics that you need to be familiar with when it comes to politics and using rhetoric as well. So legislation concerns the actual. So for example, finances, trade would be to do with economic policy, right? So you need to know a little bit about economics, for example, right? How does inflation work? What are monetary policies? What are fiscal policies, for example? And then you have things to do with national defense, which is to do with military policy, right? And legislation obviously concerns the workings of the political legislation itself, right? That it's not about what gets discussed, chosen or approved, but how that process is conducted, right? So it's about the how rather than the what, okay? Now, what you'll notice straight away is that these 5 topics within politics are things that, or fields that require expertise in of themselves. And so, you'll often realize that people who make law, legislators, they have to rely on economists or military historians or political scientists, right? They have to rely on other people to inform them because they are specialisms. You can't be a polymath in all of these subjects, right? But to be a political rhetor, right, you don't need to be an expert in these fields. All you need is to have an intelligent, generally well-grounded overview of them. You need to understand them basically, right? So when you're hearing from the experts, you know what they're talking about, right? This is why citizens and legislators, for example, it's very, very important, should study economics, right? People should study economics. They should study history. They should study politics. They should be aware of these fields, right? Even if they don't become experts, right? They should be able to understand these things. Why? Because when it comes to politics, right, they can make informed decisions. They're able to judge economic, historical, or political arguments, right? So democracy, if you like, if you want to take democracy as an ideal, is improve through broad liberal learning, right? Not through niche specialisms. That's one of the challenges that we have today, of course, that people don't have a good overall learning. They may be educated, they may have doctorates, but they don't understand politics broadly, or they don't understand politics, history, or economics as an overview. Right? They don't have a broad understanding of these things, and so that's one of the challenges, because then people just vote on whim, or how people are persuaded through media and so forth. Where people have a decent understanding, they're able to make decisions that are based on facts, based on what's before them. Okay, so with respect to all the five topics I've talked about, people deliberate about not just what to do, not only in legislating, but also in culture at large as well, right? And you can see where this is going as well in some ways. So, for example, a government decides what to do. Should we raise or lower taxes? Should we or not economically sanction a particular country? Should there be a draft or not in our constitution in our country? Should we or should we not go to war, for example? Or should we alter parts of our constitution or leave them as they are? So these are conversations that you can have. But in all of these deliberations and more, right, the task of the rhetor is to persuade the audience to choose one option and to dissuade them from making another option, right? And all of these goals, believe it or not, are to achieve one thing, which is happiness. In Arabic, we call it sa'ada, and you find this idea in Islamic tradition as well of this seeking of happiness. So this crosses all civilizations, if you like, as well. And so happiness, which is the ultimate good, which is so as the aim of collective deliberation. We're all working together to achieve a society where people are happy, right? And so the ultimate good is so as the aim of a collective deliberation about the particular goods being argued over, right? For example, Thomas Jefferson, he recognized this in his Declaration of Independence when he held as a political position that all people have an inalienable right to life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness, sa'ada, right? So this is like in our nature, if you like, it's in our fitra, as we would say. Okay, but what is a happiness? So in one place, Aristotle argues that happiness is an activity of the soul in accordance with virtue, right? And in the rhetoric, he gives a much more encompassing series of definitions, and I'm going to read through them just so you get an idea of what is happiness. We may define happiness as prosperity combined with virtue, or as independence of life, or as a secure enjoyment of maximum pleasure, or as a good condition of property and body, together with the power of guarding one's property and body and making use of them. That happiness is one or more of these things. Pretty well everybody agrees. Okay. Now, of course, not everybody in one's audience will value virtue above all. So the rhetor needs to know what other things people believe will make them happy as well. So this is really, really important. So, for example, Aristotle allows also that other goods make us more or less happy, regardless of how we define happiness. Good health, right? Sihha. Good health, for example, makes us happy even if we could be virtuous without it, right? So Plato and Aristotle, interestingly, differ on key points regarding virtue and happiness. Plato actually thinks that Plato thinks that virtue is both necessary and sufficient. Right? Plato thinks that happiness is both necessary and sufficient for human happiness. I apologize for the disturbance there. So Plato thinks this. Aristotle thinks it's necessary but not sufficient. So let me repeat that again. Plato thinks that both virtue is both necessary and sufficient for human happiness, and Aristotle thinks it's necessary but not sufficient. Right? So for him, political deliberation involves more than virtue alone, right? Because even if virtue is a good involved happiness, there are many other goods in the happy life. There are many good things beyond virtue that we need for happy life as well. Okay, so for example, Aristotle would say that you need happiness. Being happy requires some amount of wealth, right? So if you have poor government policies or fiscal policies, if you like, this is going to affect one's happiness. People are not going to be happy, right? He also believes that happiness requires children. So a fruitless war, if you go to war and it costs a mother and father their child, that would diminish their happiness, right? So no matter how virtuous people were, so that's how Aristotle sees it. So he sees it, he thinks it's necessary, but it's not sufficient as well. Somebody is obviously beyond deliberation, such as luck. Right? No one ever deliberated his or way into being lucky. Good health, for example, might be just part of genetics, but it can also be a result of one's diet. So it makes sense, for example, that we have policies, standards for food that are part of our legislative agenda as well. But the point in all of this is that political rhetoric concerns future policy. That's the point. When you're talking in a political sphere, when you're talking about politics, it's about the future and bringing about what's good for society, what's good for people. Right? And we can debate what's good, and people have different priorities in terms of what's good for them as well. So if the ultimate purpose of rhetoric is about happiness, the ultimate purpose of political rhetoric should be then the achievement of the goods important for such happiness. Right? So if politics is all about, or political rhetoric is all about happiness, then we need to achieve those things. We need to speak in a way, we need to dialogue in such a way that we can achieve happiness. In the next video, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through an example of what I mean. I'm going to show you this through an example where we go through an example from the Greek tradition and look at how this might work and how it's been debated as an example. So I'll do that in the next video for you. Until then, stay safe. Assalamu alaikum.